This is basically a glimpse on what is being covered in the TOGAF. Because TOGAF is a very powerful framework that has been implemented not only by the company but also by the government implementing enterprise architecture based on the TOGAF. And today, I think the enterprise architecture adoption has been the exponential curve because of the digital transformation. Because many organizations not aware on what they have, what they don't have. They don't have the map of the enterprise. So this is where the TOGAF is giving guideline in terms of the building block, like a Lego. You need to know the structure of your enterprise, of your business. So the 4 building blocks are the business architecture. This is where covering encompassing of the enterprise. And of course, the business architecture, in order to work today in the digital era, they need to be supported by the application and the data. And also the technology, the infrastructure that running there could be on the cloud, could be on the, software as a service, etc. Then of course you might ask, what's the difference this and the previous? In the past, application also there. We have gone through the era of computerization in the last 30 years. We have the database, but the issue is that in our life, those of you who have been working in the industry like me in the last 30 years, we have created so many islands, the stovepipe. When we did our application in the past, we really don't care about tomorrow. What we want to fix is a today problem. But the solution that we delivered 10 years ago or 15 years ago, causing a problem today. Because why? They are not interconnected. They are not designed to be integrated. So everything is stovepipe, silo. And because of that, now enterprise architecture coming into the pictures, how to connect all business, application, data, and technology into a cohesive, into a single model of the enterprise. I call this a digital twin. It's something like GPS. So the map helping us. The same thing now with the enterprise. Who knows that map? Maybe you can say, oh, those who work for 30 years. If you ask the guy, you ask them about particular division, they said, oh, that one was 10 years ago, I was in that department. Now I'm not so sure. So how do I get the answer? It's very, very tough. That's why enterprise architecture now is coming into the by storm, I would say. Those who knows the current challenges and how the enterprise architecture can help them to solve this. And I can see the trend will be moving at an exponential rate as we go even after this COVID-19. So let's go through the TOGAF standard. I think this is a very, very famous diagram. I believe if you ask TOGAF, you only remember this. Oh, this is TOGAF. Why? Because they got the bubble rotating from A, B, C, D, F, G, H. So rotating clockwise. If you notice, the clock never stops. That means enterprise architecture is the journey. It's moving transition. Transition 1, transition 2, transition 3. Of course, in the conversation or the vocabulary on the system development, they call it phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It never ends. When does the enterprise architecture end? When the organization ceases to operate. When the team no more or the business no more, then they will stop. Otherwise, they will continue to evolve. And then the middle part, they have what they call it requirement management. This is where they connect the entire enterprise. So they have some sort of the sensor. They know when the business change, which application change, which technology change, which ongoing project change, which are the bosses, the key stakeholders also impacted. That's called requirement management. That's why the arrow is double-sided. Then the next one on the TOGAF standard is that you need to have the content. It's the same thing like a database, or you want to call it data warehouse. They should have a database table that should have the so-called index. They should have a keyword, they should have primary key, they should have the field. So in the layman term, architecture content framework is exactly that. Because what happens is that when you do enterprise architecture, your senior management don't want to see the diagram, they want to see the dashboard. How do you come up with the dashboard? You configure from the content framework. I introduced the 5 building blocks of the TOGAF. Then the next one is about architecture capability framework. So because architecture is relying a lot on the human. So the human is basically, there will be an organization that need to run. In the architecture capability, we call it EAO, Enterprise Architecture Office. So Enterprise Architecture Office is running all the demand architecture, the request from the business, the impact, the gap. Then after that, in terms of the team structure, the reporting, the skill set is also very, very important. And also the biggest mistake that I discovered in the recent years is that most of the architects that I come across in the enterprise are typically the senior people. They are not selected by their qualification. I mean, they are not fully trained in the what is EA, but they are given a job because of the seniority. I mean, for those in this situation, don't need to worry because we have a full course of the training, how to equip the person with the right skill set. Otherwise, they are just given a title, but they can't execute the job properly. So this is TOGAF is addressing the importance of the capability framework. The next one is about guideline and techniques. Because in the enterprise, typically, architects don't run a single project. Typically, they have run 2 to 5 per team. So typically, the ratio about 10% of the IT strength. So if your IT strength about 100, you need to have about 10 full-time architects. So this 10 full-time architect is the one that are doing the analysis, understanding the gap, bridging business and IT, and then after that, work into identifying the impact analysis, and then work with the key stakeholders. Then the gap later will be executed into the project. So they got a way on how to manage this guideline and technique. And the last component actually is the repository. So the repository in the enterprise architecture is playing a critical role. There is no way we can manage this by Excel spreadsheet. There is no way we can manage this by the listing on the Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, because enterprise architecture today already evolved into the digital. That's why 3-4 years ago, I already visionized this concept. We call it digital enterprise architecture. I already see that we cannot do manually, because during my engagement in the consulting, we tell the client that, wow, you want to do this manually, like you are managing the warehouse today. Imagine that you're running the distribution list and manual tracking. It's just mission impossible. So this is the lesson learned enterprises need to embark. So what is actually TOGAF in a nutshell? I think this slide summarizes that. The first on the left is business vision and driver. This actually is the input. If you want to call it, is the input to the enterprise architecture. So the middle part is where the enterprise architecture framework are processing it. And then the right-hand side, business capability, is where is the ready-made. So actually, business capability is where the enterprise architecture delivering. So enterprise architecture does not deliver system, but they deliver capability. Even like now, it's talking about smart city. How on earth you can come out a smart city without a proper process? Is it by buying a technology, buying a tool from the vendor? It doesn't work that way. There got so many case studies out there. I've attended many conferences. Those smart city that are managed smartly, they have the enterprise architecture to define that. So basically, it's the vision and driver on the left, and the output is the business capability. So the middle part is where the TOGAF framework guiding us. If you want to put an analogy, it's like cooking. Because now I think most of us stay at home. So you want it or not, in the one of the day, we cannot keep eating outside. We need to cook. So vision and driver is what the ingredient that we buy. And the middle part, the TOGAF, is about the style of cooking. And the capability is the ready-made food on the table. So how does this work? The first one is that if you see on the top, you need to have capability framework. So you need to know exactly what capability required. Just now I'm talking about the architecture skill, the team role and responsibility, the task point, engagement, etc. Then you look at the development framework. Just now the development methodology, the bubble, the TOGAF framework bubble. Then you decide which are the so-called the process that you're going through, the phases. Then from there, you look at the guideline and techniques. What is our workload today? How many of us are actually available in terms of the architects, the coverage? Then after that, you look at the content framework. This is where I mentioned just now about the database table. So now you decide which viewpoint, which artifacts that we are going to develop. From there, you put the reference material, the library, or the best practices, industry best practices that you're going to do. Okay, so the way it works is this, right? The business communicate their vision and their driver to the architecture team, what they want to achieve, what they want to do, and etc. Then after that, of course, they're feeding more information on the business landscape, on the as-is. The architecture team also confirm the understanding. Then after that, of course, the tool itself informing the business and the various stakeholders what sort of information you require. For the senior management, perhaps the CEO want to have EA in terms of dashboarding. They want to know ongoing project. They want to know the capability that has been launched, etc. The CFO, Chief Financial Officer, want to know the costing of the project. Where are we now? Are we late? How much is the cost to deliver this capability? So we provide that. Then after that, on the right-hand side, this is where you set the KPI. What sort of the target capability maturity you want to achieve? Can we achieve that this year? Then the next one, of course, where we deliver the actual new business solution. This is where I think we are talking about the delivering a project. So if you see the process like this, they got many process before the project gets delivered or gets into the production. So I want you to think at this point in time, so many process of this. Are we doing this are we doing this today or not? The answer most likely we don't. Because why? Business got some idea in the typical context, and then they got the money, they got the cost center, and they straight away call the PMO. Project management straight away check, okay, next month onwards, or the next 2 months, 6 months until the end, you deliver this system. I got 3 million. So the project PMO, without knowing detail, etc., take up the project, assign, assemble the team. So what happened? Who understand the whole impact analysis? Who understand the drivers? Who understand the goals? Who understand the strategy of the organization? And how do you know your system aligned to that? It's a $1 million question. In the past, well, everybody's doing computerization. So why should I care? Now, I need to think about that. Because why? I need to be accountable. I need to know that I deliver value of technology to the business. This is the keyword. Many of the architects today, in fact, until today, they said, I have limited exposure on the business, So I'm only looking about solutioning on the architecture. Well, you need to deliver value. Okay, how you deliver value? And exactly what I'm talking about now, how to deliver value is but basically how to show the technology value to the business. Then from there, we look at any adaptation, any changes that we need to cater. So this is actually TOGAF in a nutshell. TOGAF is not meant for self-study. TOGAF is meant for reference. So, of course, some of them in the class that I taught, a couple of them, they said, I'm already TOGAF certified. I said, wow, you're already TOGAF certified. And why you're in the class? Oh, because I just want to know what actually TOGAF is. Because I managed to pass the exam, but I really don't know what is this. So, it's interesting. Some even also attended from other training courses. They said, oops, I don't really understand, but, I just want to know. So, I would think like you want to self-study, it's also very, very tough, very, very challenging to comprehend all this. As I mentioned just now, that you need to run a multiple layers, multiple team. It's like project team. You're running the project management. Doesn't mean that in the one company only run one project. You run maybe 20 project, 30 project, right? So how do you manage that? There be someone doing a testing. There be someone doing business analysis, requirement gathering. There be someone doing a coding. There be someone doing a testing or deployment. So this is exactly the same with the TOGAF. There be someone looking at the strategic architecture level, understanding what are the board management, board director, senior management, what are their KPI, what they're trying to do. Then they're also looking at the segment, which are the business unit responsible for it, which are the division, line of business impacted. Then look at the capability, the various operational team. How are they run? What are they impacted? So these are something very, very key that you need to comprehend before you embark into the architecture. And this is also guided in the TOGAF framework. The next one, of course, on the iteration, because like architecture is the journey, so there will be something that you need to go back to revisit, because whatever you define in the business architecture, suddenly when you do technology architecture, you just realize that, oops, the technology today is limited. We can't do this. That's where you need to look into the iteration to make it more real. If no iteration, then EA is not real. And the iteration also need to be very, very easy. Imagine now if you are doing enterprise architecture using Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Word, and Excel. How do you do iteration? Your document will be thousands of pages. Your Excel spreadsheet will be like multiple tabs with thousands of cells. How are you going to change? This is impossible. So you need to have the tool to manage this so that when the thing changes, you know exactly which are impacted. That's why the requirement management is holding all the relationship and the impact in all the phases on the architecture. Without proper, strong understanding, it's very difficult to execute enterprise architecture. When you talk about enterprise architecture, we manage a stakeholder. When you're talking about IT project, you manage business user in terms of the nearest to the management. So who are the stakeholders? Stakeholders is basically the big bosses, starting from the C level. So CEO, CIO, CMO, Chief Human Resource, and etc. And all divided by the function. And every function, they got their head. So architecture also need to manage this properly. And not only internally, but as well as externally. Because why? We have the stakeholders, which is our distributor. We have the stakeholders, which is our supplier. So we need to manage them properly, including like if you're running a regulatory business, your key stakeholders will be those in the regulatory government body. architecture deliverable is where we actually delivering the artifacts in terms of the catalogs. Catalog basically the inventory. What are the thing we have in our architecture, describing the building block. And matrices. What is matrices? Matrices actually is the relationship. So we know that when we change the strategy, we know exactly which business processes impacted, which department impacted in our enterprise, which application impacted, which databases impacted, which our cloud hosting impacted, or which other network impacted. That's called matrices. And the diagram basically is the diagram, the building block itself, which is typically the Archimate. So the Archimate make enterprise architecture simpler. The Archimate now is in the exponential take up rate as well, because they realize that they need to have a standardized common vocabulary and the notation to describe architecture. And this is where the deliverable inside the repository on the right hand side. So typically is that the architecture define their building block. Then after that, it will be delivered into the solutioning. Solutioning is where you actually building architecture into the realization through the IT project. Here you can see they got the foundation, they got common system, got industry and organization specific architecture, and the most right hand side. So the most right hand side is where typically residing in your repository, whereby the foundation, the common system, and industry basically is your reference architecture. So if your country central bank already issued the reference architecture for financial, for banking, then you can put that into the industry architecture. And likewise for the rest of the industry. So this is a typical repository structure. So they store all the architecture meta model, the solutioning, the building block, the governance, the capability measurement, all the standards, principle, and all the relationship among all the artifacts within the enterprise. So this is something like data warehouse or ERP, CRM. This is actually the building block of the system. So this is where I just mentioned that it's complex inside there. So we need to get the EA tool to simplify the whole process management for us, because what we need to focus is delivering value. We are not managing the administration work on this or relationship. So the EA Enterprise Architecture tool will manage this for us. So because architecture is relying a lot on the human. So the human is basically, there will be an organization that need to run. Just now I was describing on the roles, responsibility, on the knowledge, on the skill set, training, etc. This actually TOGAF in a nutshell.